What have you done to my daughter?" The father's scream echoed through the grand hall of the mansion. It was not anger, but fear. Benjamin Luxton, the widowed millionaire, had never felt so helpless ever since his wife died in that fire and his twin daughters began suffering endless sleepless nights. Then Lena appeared. An anonymous waitress, without papers or any clear purpose. After one night, the children slept peacefully. But what chilled Benjamin to the bone was her whisper, 2:43 a.m., just like the flames their mother once saw. This was not a miracle. This was judgment. The Luxton mansion sat silent atop a hill on the outskirts of Portland, where the wind sweeping through marble corridors sometimes rang louder than the laughter that once filled its halls. Since his wife's quiet funeral, Benjamin Luxton had not set foot outside that house with the conviction of a man truly alive. The real estate millionaire who once ruled billion-dollar deals now found himself powerless to solve the two smallest problems under his roof: his daughter's sleep and the terrifying silence that grew heavier by the day. Elsie and Emery, the newly 5-year-old twins, had once been the light of his life. But since that night of the fire, since the moment his wife's charred body was discovered clutching her singed wedding ring, the children seemed to inhabit another world. No one, not even the psychologist, could breach that silence. They stayed awake each night, shrieking in delirium, then weeping wordlessly. The house's suffocating atmosphere no longer stemmed from their cries, but from the invisible helplessness seeping into every corner. Ivy League-educated nannies, therapists paid double market rates, all departed within 3 weeks or less. None could endure it. None understood. And perhaps none truly dared face whatever the children were trying to bury in their subconscious. That afternoon was a gray Sunday. Benjamin stubbled, his shirt rumpled, walked alone through East Portland's poorer district with no purpose other than to escape the silence choking his home. He ducked into a rundown diner with peeling walls and rickety tables, the last place a man like him should ever set foot. There, the waitress slid a cup of coffee to him without a question. Her eyes did not flinch as most would when recognizing him. That gaze, cold, deep, unnervingly, still made him shiver. Her name was Lena Carter. Nothing remarkable in her appearance. Yet in the way she observed the two children slumped in their car seats outside with no fear, no pity, only recognition, it was as though she had witnessed that scene many times before. When he returned for his second cup of coffee, Lena said only, "I think I can help." Her voice was not an offer, but an undeniable fact. No business card, no sales pitch, no expectations. He did not know what compelled him to nod. And that nod set in motion a chain of events from which there was no turning back. But why did an anonymous waitress know how to enter the nightmare that had defeated an entire team of psychologists?
Welcome to 30 Millionaire Stories, where success meets solitude, and every story heals a hidden wound. Subscribe and discover the heart behind the fortune.
That afternoon, the sun cast a withered golden shadow across the car window, settling over the two tiny faces in the back seat like a thin layer of ash. Elsie and Emery sat motionless, neither crying nor smiling, simply staring out as if they were two silhouettes yet to shape their emotions. Lena Carter stood by the diner door, tilting her head as she watched. There was no pity in her eyes, nor surprise. It was the gaze of someone who had witnessed something too many times enough to know that this silence was more dangerous than any cry. Her words slipped out almost unconsciously. "I know why the children can't sleep." But Benjamin Luxton heard it as a declaration rather than an offer of help. A truth no one had dared speak. Perhaps it was his desperation, or perhaps it was that look calm, certain, needing no proof that made him nod in silence. That night, for the first time in 8 long months, there were no tiny footsteps padding down the hallway, no midnight screams or frightened whispers in delirium. Elsie and Emery slept, truly slept, for 9 uninterrupted hours without opening their eyes. The next morning, they woke as if the painful part of that nightmare had been excised. Benjamin watched from the doorway. He did not ask what Lena had done. He simply observed in silence, as if even a word might shatter the fragile miracle spreading through the memory-haunted house. But not everyone in the mansion could so easily believe in this sudden peace. Bryce, the loyal butler who had served the Luxtons for more than a decade, could not conceal his suspicion. His instincts, honed by years of witnessing everything within these walls, would not let him rest. Lena had arrived too easily. No background checks, no interview, no introductions. Just one sentence, and Benjamin had allowed her into his daughter's lives. Bryce felt it was wrong, unfatherly, at odds with how the world worked. He began to watch Lena. Every gesture, every step, every word logged in his mind like an amateur detective. Strangely, he found nothing amiss. She never overstepped with the children, never pried into the family's private affairs, never rummaged or meddled. She simply did her work. Yet, something about the way Lena moved through the house, as if she already knew every corner, every creak of the wooden floor, made Bryce even more uneasy. On the third breakfast since Lena's arrival, he stood leaned against the kitchen door, watching her from afar. Lena was slicing apples for Elsie with swift, deft hands, her eyes never leaving the child. Emery sat nearby, watching her sister intently, a scene that had almost never happened before. An invisible bond was forming, so quickly that Bryce found it terrifying, not because it seemed dangerous, but because it felt unbelievably real. He began combing social media, scouring public records, even calling a few lawyer friends to ask about the name Lena Carter. He found almost nothing. She seemed to have no prior existence, as if a ghost had stepped out of that rundown diner and into the Luxton household, carrying a secret no one could fathom. Benjamin, by contrast, felt his heart soften, not because he trusted completely, but because he could see the change in his daughter's eyes. No more vacant stares, no more clinging to the memory of their lost mother. Lena did not replace anyone, but her presence was like an open door, letting in fresh air, gentle, yet enough to let them breathe again. He wondered, how could a stranger with no credentials or pedigree understand the children so well? That question echoed in his mind as he watched Lena standing in the garden, watching the girls run and play. She did not laugh loudly or force herself upon them, yet there was something in her gaze that left the children unguarded, as if they knew they were safe. Upstairs, Bryce drew the curtains quietly, his gaze heavy. He did not know whether he was witnessing a miracle or an elaborate scheme. And you? If a stranger appeared and healed what your nearest and dearest had been powerless to fix for months, would you feel grateful or suspicious? Dear viewers, take a moment to relax or pour yourself a glass of water. Then stay tuned as the story's next surprising developments unfold. Comment 1 if you're enjoying the tale, and let us know you're still here. Prolonged silence often sows more suspicion than an outright accusation, and in the Luxton mansion, after 3 unnaturally peaceful days, the silence began to feel like a threat. No nighttime cries, no soft footsteps echoing down the hallway, no sight of the 2 exhausted children leaning against their father in the golden light streaming through the window. Yet instead of feeling healed, Bryce, the butler, who had lived within these walls for too long, felt that something was amiss. That suspicion clung to him like a wet coat. Not because Lena had done anything overtly wrong. On the contrary, she did everything right so perfectly that it unsettled him all the more. Nobody is flawless unless they're hiding something. One sleepless night, Bryce sat alone in his study, the desk lamp casting a pale glow across his face. His fingers flew over the laptop keyboard, composing a hurried email sent anonymously to the city's Child Protective Services director. The message hinted that A stranger without records or credentials was caring for two motherless children, that their sudden improvement in sleep might not stem from therapy, but from something far stronger, drugs. Or worse, a meticulously staged emotional ruse designed to manipulate trust. He attached no proof, because he had none, but he thought that planting a single seed of doubt would be enough to make everything crack. Yet Lena had anticipated this. The next morning, as sunlight filtered gently through the living room curtains, she appeared holding a small device, an old scratched phone tethered to an external hard drive. She placed it on the table without a word, her gaze as still as a windless lake. Benjamin reached out, tapped the screen, and the video began. No narration, no special effects, just raw footage, simple camera angles, sometimes a little off-kilter, but each frame spoke volumes. Lena seated on the floor beside Elsie and Emery, her hand guiding theirs as they drew their nightmare on paper, a smoky room, a collapsing figure, a silent scream. Then scenes of Lena placing small stones on the tabletop, and Emery blowing across each one, each breath, lifting a fear, as Lena explained in the video, or her ringing a glass bell, the soft tones creating an atmosphere that relaxed the body while allowing the mind to settle. Benjamin watched, his eyes growing misty, his fists clenching as the footage cut to Emery drifting to sleep in Lena's lap, her breathing even, her face released from the years-old ache. He didn't know whether this was a recognized therapy taught in any institution, but one thing he was sure of, no one had ever understood his daughters like this. In the past 8 months, 5 specialists, including a child psychologist from Harvard, had failed to reach the girls. They said time would heal. They prescribed sedatives. They recommended emotional isolation. Lena? She simply sat on the floor, looked into the children's eyes, and let them look back. No distance, no demonstration needed. Bryce stood at the end of the hallway, watching the room where the video still played. He felt a pang in his chest, not shame, but the truth revealing itself in a way he hadn't expected. He had wanted to protect them, but perhaps it was his blind protection that had done the real harm. Benjamin said nothing all morning. He replayed each clip slowly, as if deciphering his children's sleep journal in a new language. Lena made no excuses. She let the images speak for her. When the final video ended, Lena simply rose, left the device on the table, and walked away. Not a single word for Bryce, though she knew exactly what he had done. But that silence made him feel smaller than any reproach could. That afternoon, the children ran joyfully across the lawn. Sunlight washed their hair in golden hues, as if cleansing it of the ashes of their memories. Lena sat on the porch, quietly watching them play. Benjamin observed from a distance, and for the first time he wondered, had she appeared for a reason larger than to help? A stranger arrives and heals what an entire team of experts could not. Would you believe it was coincidence? Or a plan drawn long ago? That night, the large clock in the hallway struck exactly 2:43. In the moss-covered stillness of the room, Emery stirred beneath her blankets, her eyes opening wide in the darkness, but she did not cry. The little girl listened, as if in a dream someone had just called her name in a familiar voice she could no longer place. Lena sat in the corner, her hand resting gently on a small glass bell. The tone rang out not loud but steady and clear, like a whisper from the other side of the wall of memory. The next morning, as the sun's first rays filtered through the white curtains, Bryce received a call from an old acquaintance at the University of Oregon. A copy of the student records arrived just hours later. Name: Lena Marie Carter. Department: Developmental Psychology. Academic standing: excellent. Senior Year Award: Outstanding research on post-traumatic sleep disorders in adolescents. Everything matched. But what choked Bryce was not the transcript, it was a small line in the file about her scholarship withdrawal. Withdrew from PhD program following the suicide of an immediate family member. Bryce photographed that page. In his eyes, something shifted, not suspicion this time, but another feeling elderly men hate to admit, guilt. Benjamin took the printed copy in hand and froze in the center of his study. He read and reread it, each line cutting through the layers of memory he thought he had locked away. The name of Lena's relative Emily Carter immediately invoked a distant recollection Benjamin had tried to forget. Emily Carter had worked at Luxton Healthcare's South Branch, a top performer who resigned only months before taking her own life. The internal review then noted, "Not a cultural fit with the corporation." A cold, callous phrase capable of crushing anyone pushed to the emotional brink. Benjamin couldn't recall how many resignation letters he had signed just like that, perhaps hundreds. But now, looking into Lena's eyes that had entered his home, soothed his children's sleep, and unearthed truths he had once denied, he realized one thing clearly. Her presence here was no accident. Lena did not come seeking a job. She needed no forgiveness. She craved no money. She sought only one thing: acknowledgement of the truth. And the cruelest irony was that the thing that hurt Benjamin most was not the truth of the past, but when he understood that, in her effort to heal his children, Lena had inadvertently healed the part of him he had discarded to become an unfeeling CEO. Among the audio recordings Lena left after each session, one segment haunted Benjamin more than any other. It was Emery's voice, soft and half asleep. "She didn't come to lull me to sleep. She came to say that Mommy still loves me." Those words, whispered faintly at 2:43 a.m., had locked away the panic that had haunted the girl for 8 long months. But for Benjamin, they were even more. The final cut, stripping away the mask he had worn since Evelyn's death. For the first time, he dared to look in the mirror and meet his own eyes. At the end of the hallway, Lena still sat there, composed as if she had touched neither life nor death. Yet in her gaze lay the memory of one who had lost everything, who had once sat beside a dying patient she could not save and was now retracing that journey, not for vengeance, but to set something right. Did she come to reopen old wounds, or to prove that from those wounds, something gentler than revenge could still emerge? Dear viewers, stay tuned for the next chapter that will leave you in awe. Take a moment to hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always thrilling to see friends join us from all around the world. A storm never begins with thunder. It usually arrives quietly, with a sky weighed down and an engulfing silence. And in the small meeting room behind the Luxton Mansion's library, that was the atmosphere as Lena placed the thick dossier on the oak table beneath the pale golden light and the silent presence of 3 people. Benjamin stood motionless. Bryce sat upright, hands resting on his knees as if he were in an official inquiry. Lena spoke little. She simply opened to the first page. Each document was a cross-section resignation letters, internal emails, performance evaluations, yet no names were preserved. Only the same vague reasons repeated over and over. Not a fit with Luxton culture, difficulty integrating with high-end clients, insufficient ability to guide brand direction. 12 names in total. One file was crossed out in red ink, the stain spreading like blood across the aged paper. Emily Carter. Benjamin felt his chest tighten. Those words, once so familiar, once stamped boldly on hundreds of HR reports he had approved. But now, lined up in a single presentation, no longer hidden behind data or corporate jargon, they appeared as cold, precise blades. The woman in the photograph at the back of the dossier, deep eyes, lightly curled hair, a forced smile, was Emily, Lena's sister. the one who had entered Luxton with ambition and left in silence. Lena offered no lecture, no condemnation. She spoke only one sentence, as if testing them. "This is what I could not save my sister from." In the corner, Bryce shifted ever so slightly. His hand clenched as Lena added another copy, an email he himself had sent 5 years before, titled Personnel Action Proposal, Cultural Misalignment. The wording was clinical and precise, devoid of emotion, like the guillotine of a system accustomed to elimination. For the first time in 2 decades of serving the Luxtons, Bryce could not keep his voice steady. He admitted the truth, made no excuses. But he looked at Lena with drooping eyes, the eyes of a man who thought he acted for the organization's benefit, now seeing nothing but a trail of lives crushed by the very system he upheld. Benjamin did not look at Bryce. He stared at the dossier, at Emily's name repeating in each evaluation, each time a new excuse, a fresh denial, a crack in someone's life he had never bothered to learn. And in that moment, every distance between Lena and the Luxton family vanished. She was no longer a domestic worker, no longer a ghost from the past. She was the echo of those who had been cast aside, those nobody remembered or mourned, until someone like Lena returned not to demand justice, but to remind them, silence is complicity. Benjamin slid his chair back, eyes never leaving the list. He did not need anyone to tell him he was at fault. That knowledge had taken hold when Emery whispered at 2:43 a.m. about her mother's love. But now, that pain had a name, a face, a system that created it. Bryce rose. He did not apologize to Lena, but as he left the room, he pressed the dossier to his chest, a silent confession. Everyone understood. Perhaps he had not changed. But for the first time, he felt compelled to remain silent, not out of fear, but out of shame. Outside, the Portland sky remained leaden, but in the hearts of those who once believed themselves right, a void had begun to form, where blind faith had just been stripped away. And there, perhaps, something truer awaited. What would you do if one day you realized you had stood between cruelty and righteousness and chose to remain silent? The morning after the confrontation, Portland remained cold and gray, but within the Luxton mansion, something had fractured quietly, without fanfare or drama, yet deeply. Within the heart of someone who had kept silent for far too long, Benjamin sat alone in his study. On the desk lay the list of 12 names, and beside it, Bryce's personnel file, the man who had once been his right hand and whose memory was intertwined with his entire career. But now, that file represented a part of the darkness he could no longer turn away from. His pen trembling, Benjamin signed the termination order, not out of anger, but out of understanding. Retaining Bryce would mean perpetuating self-deception. Along with the decision, he attached an offer of lifelong compensation as the only way to thank a man who had been loyal but lost his way. Next, Benjamin reopened the files of the 12 former employees. It was more than a review. He read every line, every remark, every tiny detail, as if retracing all the things he himself had overlooked. A week later, 12 envelopes left the Luxton office. Each contained a personal apology, a fair severance package, and an invitation to meet if they wished not to reopen old wounds, but to close them with the truth. At the same time, a new position was created at Luxton Group, Director of Cultural Diversity and Organizational Empathy, and Benjamin wanted no one but Lena Carter to fill it first. She was invited to a formal but low-key internal meeting. Benjamin presented the new mission and the commitment to build an environment where no one would be judged by so-called company culture, but by dignity, effort, and individual identity. Lena smiled, but she declined. She didn't need a title. She refused to become the emblem of a corporation that had once crushed her sister. Instead, she chose to step away, not to disappear, but to begin something different, something outside any system, unmeasured by profit margins or quarterly reports. Months later, on the outskirts of Oregon, a small center was established. No large sign, no media coverage. Yet each week, dozens of children once plagued by sleeplessness from trauma, grief, and loss no one else understood. Lena called it the center of light because she believed there is a point of light within every child, one that only patience and care can uncover and keep burning. Every Saturday, a silver SUV would pull up at its gate. The twin girls would step out, Elsie and Emery, with brighter eyes, stronger voices, and sure-footed steps. They called Lena by a name no one had taught them, the light in my dreams. Benjamin was no longer CEO of Luxton Group. He withdrew from day-to-day operations, remaining only as an advisor, and spent more time in the house north of the pine forest. Yet every Saturday morning, he'd sit in his car, waiting for his daughters, peering through the windshield to see Lena bending down to speak with another child. In that moment, no words of thanks were needed for. Sometimes forgiveness arrives not in speech, but in a life reborn from the very place of pain. Once, Emery returned to the car holding a drawing of their mother. In it were 3 figures, a long-haired woman, a little angel, and a girl in white blowing a small glass bell. "This is the most beautiful dream I've ever drawn," she said, then rested her head on her father's shoulder. Benjamin said nothing. He simply nodded. In that silence lay a liberation that some spend a lifetime seeking. Some losses can never be erased, but there are also people through their gentle, quiet work who transform that loss into a haven. Are you part of that? There are wounds no one sees, yet they silently choke our sleep, our faith, and even the future of a person. And sometimes, the one who comes to heal is not a doctor or an expert, but a soul that has itself endured those very cracks. Lena's story is not only about justice or forgiveness. It is a reminder that we have the right to hurt, but also the right to rise and turn our pain into light for others. Sometimes a single gentle act can change the destiny of a child or of a father learning how to love again. If this story has touched you, leave a comment, sharing your thoughts below. We read every line at 11:30 p.m. each day. Let us know. What have you stayed silent about? And don't forget to tap the heart. Share this video with your loved ones in the United States, and subscribe so you won't miss the stories that make you believe in kindness once more. Because sometimes the most beautiful things emerge from where we've hurt the most.